All right, folks, hello and welcome to today's Zentegra webinar series. Today, our guest is going to be Ivanti, and we are going to talk about the state of user environment management and kind of where that sits inside of Ivanti and take you through a tour of where AppSense and RES and the future of AppSense and RES within Ivanti. So today, your presenters are, my name is Pete Downing. I am the CMTO for Zentegra. I will explain at the end a little bit about who Integra is and how we fit in as a partner with Ivanti. Also on the phone, we got Simon Townsend, who is the Chief Technology out of EMEA. He's joined us today to take us through the future of workspace management, and he's going to give us some insights into if you're a RES customer, what to expect, if you're an AppSense customer, what to expect. And then finally, we have Ed Webster, who's the practice lead here at Zentegra for Ivanti. And he's going to take us through a simple demo to show you guys what App Manager looks like and just kind of highlight some key features in more of the security realm. So we're going to take you through a good webinar today, and hopefully you guys find this valuable. So again, we're going to go through a little history of the UEM. I'll take you through that. We're going to go through the landscape of Ivanti and how AppSense and RES fit in. We're going to talk about the future, and then finally we'll talk about migration and what to expect. And then we'll do a quick demo, and then at the end we will open it up for Q&A. We can do it through the Q&A dialogue and or unmute you if needed. So just let us know if you have a question and we can answer it. So a few housekeeping items. So again, I mentioned the question and answer dialogue. If you do have a question as we're going through the content today, don't hesitate to put a question in the Q&A dialogue. It's under the GoToWebinar console questions, and we will be monitoring those, and we may pause and answer them throughout the content. So we want to make this as interactive as possible. So do not hesitate to ask any questions throughout the webinar. All right, and that's pretty much it because everybody's unmuted. If you do have a question at the end and you want to be unmuted, there's a hand raise function in the GoToWebinar. We can also unmute you, and you can ask the question live if you desire as well. All right, so let's talk about user environment management and and the two players that are in the Ivanti portfolio. So, I used to work at RES Software. I was the product manager, and I ran product management for ResOne Workspace. And then personally, I've spent about almost 15 years in this space, and I used to interact with AppSense way back in 2005, 2006 when I was at Ardence, and Simon and I have known each other a long time, and that was my first exposure to AppSense. And in the AppSense portfolio, you have application control, you have environment management, so application control is security focused. You got environment management, which is your UEM tool, your user environment management tool, performance management, which is perfmon focused. And now I can say this, arguably they're good at this, and this is one of their I think premier features in the stack. File director, which Simon will cover a little bit, and we'll talk about what is it, but that's how to access your files from anywhere. And then finally, Insight, which is reporting. And then, as you all know, AppSense was acquired back in March 2016 at the time by LANDesk, and then LANDesk then changed their name to Ivanti. And then parallel to that, you had ResOne Workspace and RES out there, competing against AppSense. And in their stack, they had ResOne Workspace, which was their UEM tool. You had your ResOne Security, which is the security features within ResOne Workspace, so things like whitelisting, blacklisting, the governance tool, which is again a form of reporting, but also built in there was some basic performance management functionalities. And then off to the side, and as add-ons, you could also bundle in ResOne Automation, which they offered a free version, so you could automate tasks based on triggers. And then finally, they launched ResOne Identity, which was ResOne's service store back before it was ResOne Identity. And then, as you all know, back in July last year, 2017, they were acquired by Ivanti. So now we have these two products, and they're now under the Ivanti umbrella. And now Ivanti is calling this, User Workspace Manager. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to pass the baton over to Simon, and he's going to take us through the portfolio and what to expect with AppSense and RES. So Simon, I'm going to pass it over to you and give you keyboard and mouse control so you can drive the slides.
Perfect. Thank you, Pete. Great introduction. Thanks to everyone that's joining the webinar. As Pete said, if there's any questions, as direct as you want to be, then please post those and we will do our very best to answer them. And I'm sure Pete and Ed might have some questions for me as we go through this as well. So yeah, both organizations now underneath the Ivanti umbrella, and really now renamed something we would call User Workspace Management. And I suppose it's important just to clarify why we've done that and what we mean by that. Many of us, myself, Pete, and perhaps many of you on the phone would have been talking about UEM, user environment management for solutions, for quite some time. And when we think of UEM, we typically think of profile management. And I think what RES and AppSense did and continue to do is to really expand on the fact that when we're managing users, we are doing far more than just profile management, and hopefully that will come out as we go through this webinar. But also UEM as a terminology, particularly in 2018, particularly within the next couple of months, we're going to start to see the term UEM used more to describe unified endpoint management. So you're talking more there about some of the other products that Ivanti's got, some of the products that AirWatch, VMware have got, and things like Intune. They're really trying to get into a unified endpoint management space. And part of unified endpoint management is dealing with the user. And so, that's why we've renamed this space from UEM to User Workspace Management. And it is about managing the user's workspace, not just doing profile management as well. So I think Pete did a good introduction, but let's just clear some things up because we've been through some name changes and it may be a little confusing to some people on the phone. For many, many years, AppSense had a suite of products called DesktopNow. And that suite of technologies contained Application Manager, Environment Manager, and Performance Manager. You could buy those three components separately. If you just wanted to control what applications ran for a user, you just buy Application Manager. If you wanted to configure the user's environment as they logged on and replace logon scripts and group policies, you do Environment Manager. If you wanted to manage CPU and memory and get increased user density, you'd buy a Performance Manager. But somewhere in the region of 75% of our customers bought this product called DesktopNow. We then extended that to something called DesktopNow Plus, and that started to then include some new technologies called File Director and Insight, and that's really where AppSense was up to when it was then acquired by LANDesk, now known as Ivanti. If you took the as Pete covered off, the RES products, they typically went to market in three areas. The RES workspace and all of the modules, the security modules, the desktop composition modules, they were really competing in a very similar space to AppSense DesktopNow. But then in addition to that, they also had a very mature technology called ResOne Automation, and then in more recent years, this ResOne Identity. And it's important to note that as we go through this presentation, some of this conversation is going to be around how does ResOne Workspace fit within Ivanti alongside the AppSense portfolio, but also where does Identity Director and Automation now sit within the broader Ivanti family, and what does that mean from a strategy going forward. Ivanti is an organization. We're about 2,000 people in size. We've got a global presence. We are made up of a number of pieces of technology today. The original brand was LANDesk, arguably the market leader in what was known as the client management tool space. So the ability, very much like an SCCM and an Altiris back in the day, to help organizations manage Windows-based devices at scale. And that's something that we continue to do today, but has now evolved into what we'd call unified endpoint management. We can manage Mac devices, mobile devices, etc. as well. But we've also then merged with Heat, who had an extremely well-known product called Front Range that really focuses on service management. So in the same way that some of you will be using ServiceNow or BMC, Ivanti is recognized as one of those market leaders in the service management space as well. And what we're ultimately trying to do here is to try and help IT do more with less, try and help IT spend more time on digital transformation and innovation, and worry less about how do we do Windows migrations and how do we run our service desk and how do we start to operationalize a lot of what could be termed as legacy IT. And so a lot of these vendors, some of those you may be familiar with, Dimension for some security products, Shavlik from a patch point of view. A number of vendors have now come together, and we're starting to rationalize and bring those solutions together so that we can actually start to bring together IT operations, security, and service management. As you really look at what was LANDesk of old trying to do, what was AppSense trying to do, what was RES trying to do, we all had a very similar vision, right? Which is ultimately, can we get to the point where we can automate, secure, optimize, and manage these digital workspaces that we all use? We're logging onto laptops, we're logging onto virtual desktops, we're logging onto Citrix environments, desktop as a service. We're jumping from one non-persistent environment to another, working from different locations, and ultimately IT need to manage that. They need to give a great user experience. They still need to make sure that there's no security threats there. They need to try and deliver things as quickly as possible without that taking up too much time and money. And really, Ivanti as a whole, very similar to what ResOne AppSense were doing to try and, okay, can we provide tools that help IT achieve that? If you look at the complete portfolio, we're not going to go through the portfolio today, but the Ivanti portfolio really focuses in on a number of areas. We've got a #1 patching solution globally and a very mature, in-depth stack of preventative security technologies to help protect the data center and the endpoint. We play very largely in this unified endpoint management space, which includes the former ResOne AppSense products. We've got some very new technology that allows us to do both software and hardware asset management. A third of our business is really in service management, running people's service desks and helping automate these other areas. And then we've also got a piece around identity and automation. If you look at where AppSense and RES technologies really start to have an impact on the overall Ivanti portfolio, if you look at this screen here, you can really start to see that we carry forward the ResOne identity product. That becomes a separate entity within our portfolio, helping organizations take a user's identity, help with, for instance, the onboarding, the offboarding process that people go to, and then also on the automation space, helping organizations automate a lot of these common tasks that they're doing, and also for us, start to integrate a lot of these areas as well. So for example, allowing from your service management or your service desk, you can actually start to automate the build of a Citrix environment, or adding users, publishing applications, or doing profile management, or controlling elements of the security set. So automation and identity plays a very important part in terms of what we're doing. But today, our focus is really on these two pieces here. So hopefully a lot of you are either existing AppSense customers or existing former RES customers. Really, we want to focus on, okay, what does the strategy look like around these two products moving forward? The first thing to say, and mustn't be forgotten, is that it doesn't matter whether you are a former AppSense customer or a former RES Workspace customer. Both products are still available. Nothing has been is going end of life, and if you are looking at continuing or increasing your deployment of either of those two technologies, then our recommendation is very loud and clear. Stay exactly where you are, continue rolling out the piece of technology you've got. If you want to add 1,000 users or 10,000 users to your environment and you're already using either the former AppSense or the former RES products, then stay exactly where you are and continue with that rollout. We sell both of those products. There are, for your information, there's probably about 5,500 customers that utilize DesktopNow. There's somewhere in the region of 3,500 to 4,000 customers globally that utilize the RES products. I was in Madrid 2 weeks ago talking to various former RES customers about how they want to increase their deployment by 10,000, 20,000 seats. I've got customers who have deployed AppSense Desktop now to 220,000 seats, and they're continuing to do so. So both products continue to be fully maintained and fully supported, and that typically means that you can call up the help desk, you can, dare I say, raise any bugs if there are any. There are sustained development teams as Citrix brings out new versions of their platform, as new versions of Windows come out. We continue to support both of those products moving forward. However, there are also additional parts, technologies and capabilities that have come from both AppSense and RES that are now obviously available to our customers as well. So for instance, if you were a former AppSense customer or you've got DesktopNow deployed, because of the RES acquisition, you've now got former RES technologies like Automation and Identity Director that can link in and complement your DesktopNow solution. There is the VDA, or Virtual Desktop Extender technology, which allows local applications to be published inside a Citrix desktop that is now available to those former AppSense customers. And if you wanted to do a form of cloud reporting or look at some additional reporting capabilities that RES previously had, then that's also available to those AppSense customers. Likewise, on the RES side of things, if you're an existing Workspace Control customer, you've now got access to evaluate things like File Director and Insight, and also look at some of the new reporting tools that we used to have within the Ivanti and AppSense portfolio as well. So we're seeing a number of customers at the moment actually come to us and say, hey, look, I'm an existing DesktopNow customer. How can I utilize automation within my environment? What can I start to automate inside the DesktopNow portfolio that perhaps I wasn't able to do before because I made a decision to go with AppSense? And likewise, we've put support for File Director into the RES product. And so we've got customers now who are using RES Workspace Control to do profile management and security, but are now looking at File Director to give users access to their files, and those things are integrated. The other thing to look at is what's going on from a roadmap point of view. When the RES acquisition took place, it was in the middle of last year. Since that acquisition, we have stayed committed to our RES customers. We've actually rolled out 10.1 and 10.2 of the RES Workspace product. That has brought in some additional functionality around security, around whitelisting, around certificate support, and I'm pleased to say that we're still working with a large number of customers going through some of those migrations as well. As you can see from there, we do have a 10.3 planned, and we are continuing throughout this year to put those additional point releases in terms of service updates. So again, this just demonstrates that neither one of these products is going anywhere. We continue to maintain and support them. But as you'll see, we are going to start to look at how we can start to rationalize some of that. And I think this slide hopefully summarizes that quite nicely. The current and the go forward strategy for Ivanti is to build on top of the AppSense DesktopNow platform. So that AppSense DesktopNow platform has now been renamed to Ivanti User Workspace Manager, and any new features and any new platform support that we introduce and any innovation that we do will ultimately go onto that platform. So it makes perfect sense to continue to support and maintain both products, but it also makes perfect sense to focus our attention on one of those platforms. And as we look forward to, dare I say, 2020 and on, and we start to look at things like cloud delivered desktops, Azure AD, Intune, and new ways, modern device management, new ways of managing our Windows estates, It is the user workspace management platform that is the one that we are going to continue to innovate and build incremental features onto. That doesn't mean to say, as I've said numerous times, that the RES Workspace control doesn't continue. And in fact, what we are going to do with our 10.3 is actually put a label on that and call that a long-term maintenance release. So that will be in the same way that Citrix and Microsoft give you an LTSR or whatever they might want to call it from one week to the next. We will put that RES Workspace control into an LTMR, which ultimately means that you'll continue to get support, but it won't have any incremental or new features coming onto that platform. Any new features will go onto that green user workspace management platform. Over the course of the next couple of months, we have already started to work with customers who have been using some key features within the RES Workspace control platform as well, and they have identified that there are some things within that platform that are currently missing from User Workspace Manager, and so they've said, look, can you port some of those features across? Things like being able to deploy AppV applications automatically from within RES Workspace control. We are looking at bringing that functionality into the Ivanti User Workspace Manager. RES Workspace control obviously also had inbuilt integration from an automation and an identity point of view, something that is currently missing from User Workspace Manager, but will be available in the next release in the second half of this year. So we're already well on a journey to bring some of those former RES items and features and functionality into User Workspace Manager, but also then moving forward, looking at how we can then build on this platform even further. Pete, is there any questions from you or Ed on anything I've said there, or anything that you feel that I may have missed?
No, I think the big question, just a curiosity question, and there's no questions, but again, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A dialogue. Is if you were to, I know I was a product manager once, so I know you can't put a hard date on it, but if you were to look at the migration, how long does Ivanti envision this taking to merge some of the features from ResOne Workspace into User Workspace Manager?
Yeah, so automation, integration will be done within the next release of User Workspace Manager, and that is ultimately due out within the next 6 to 8 weeks. It's pretty much done. It's going through a QA cycle at the moment. The identity integration is pretty much done, but would be available by the end of the year. And at the moment, the AppV integration is being achieved by some pre-configured PowerShell configuration snippets that would allow someone to move across. That AppV integration natively may well come sometime early 2019, but a lot of that depends on how many customers are migrating and whether the current PowerShell workaround is good enough, because it does exactly what it says on the tin, right? We've taken the same underlying code that the RES Workspace was using to request and pull down an AppV application and just put that into User Workspace Manager, and it works quite nicely. Got a couple of accounts that are doing that. You do raise a valid point there, and perhaps a question, which is, well, when should I migrate, and should I migrate? And this is what I'm currently telling people, which is, if you currently have got RES Workspace control in place, and you are not changing your version of Citrix, you are not upgrading to Windows 10, you're not ultimately going through a project of any sort to upgrade the platform that you deliver, then I would, as I said before, I'd stay exactly where you are. There is no reason to change. If something isn't broke, then don't try and fix it. If, however, you have got a project coming up within the next 6 to 12 months that says we're going to go through a Windows 10 upgrade, we're going to move off XenApp 6.x, and we're going to be looking at Server 2016 and the latest version of Citrix, then now would be the time to evaluate Ivanti User Workspace Manager and start to plan that migration, because you will ultimately get you'll be moving to the platform that we are going forward on and building on top of. So that would be my recommendation. There is no point in my mind in anybody upgrading or migrating from RES to the User Workspace Manager just because Ivanti have acquired them. But if you're doing a refresh project of any sort, whether it be Windows or Citrix, then that would be a very, very good time to engage with, people like yourself, Pete, and go through what that ultimately looks like and what that migration could look like. And there are some things we can do, particularly around the user's profile, so we can capture the user's profiles from RES, bring them into Ivanti Workspace Manager. Likewise, we could do that with any other profile technology. And there are some configuration elements that we can bring across as well, right? If you've got some GPOs already set up, if you've got some printer mappings in place and drive mappings in place, there are some tools and some methods that we use to try and ease that migration to the Workspace Manager product.
So yeah, a couple of good questions here. I'll cherry pick one or two, and then we can answer some of the other ones at the end. So good question from Owen. He's just making sure he heard you right. Where does the VDX, virtual desktop functionality, the VDX technology fit into DesktopNow? I guess what I think we're trying to ask is it part of the solution, or is it an add-on license?
That is part of the solution. So I mean, it is a standalone piece of technology. So technically, it's not integrated today into User Workspace Manager, but there is no reason whatsoever that it can't work with User Workspace Control. It would be an additional license if you were a AppSense DesktopNow customer, but if you were a RES customer and you already had it licensed and you migrated over to the User Workspace Manager, then you just continue to use it.
Cool. All right, and I'm going to save one of the questions because I know you're going to cover this in a second, but I'll ask you to get there. But one other question, and I'm going to guess the answer is no. Is there any plan to bring Outlook OST cache solution into the RES Workspace platform? It's already in AppSense.
Yeah, very good question. There is some pressure on us to do that. At the moment, the answer to that is no. There are some how do I want to call it? There is a custom way, a scripted way in which you can get some of that functionality working today within Workspace Control. So, let's be frank, mounting a VHD, creating a VHD, mounting a VHD, redirecting the OST onto the VHD, it's not rocket science. And I know that there are technologies out there that go even further than just that basic principle. But I mean, ultimately, user profile disks can do a very, very similar thing as well. So what I would say to that, the easy thing to say to that, get in touch with us and we can give you some scripts that may be able to provide you some functionality within Workspace Control to do that OST support. But at the moment, there is no plans to natively put that type of functionality or anything on top of that into Workspace Control. It is definitely part of User Workspace Manager.
Cool. All right. So I'm going to save this next question for when you get to it, because I think you're going to cover it in a few minutes. So. Okay,
good. Right. So I think this slide probably should have come a little bit earlier on, but as we went through that Ivanti portfolio earlier, we sort of highlighted where AppSense and RES played its part. But I just wanted to call this out, and the reason being is that at the moment I'm doing a lot of work with existing AppSense customers and existing RES customers, and all around how do they move to the latest version of Citrix, how do they get from Windows 7 to Windows 10. And there is this, in many cases, for some of our former AppSense and RES customers, this unknown technology, also within this unified endpoint management space, called Ivanti Endpoint Manager. And I just wanted to call it out. I mean, this is just a very simple way. Many of you on the call would have seen, this concept of a desktop being broken down into layers before. I mean, me and Pete have been talking about this for 15 years, back to the Ardence days, right? When we used to talk about how we would separate out the device from the OS, separate the apps in terms of app V or whatever it might be from the OS. If you look at that computing stack, these Ivanti User Workspace Manager solutions, the former AppSense, they're really focused on, the user's profile. What does the user's desktop look like? How do we apply group GPOs? What do we do around application control? How do we get users' data and files down to them as quickly as possible? Below the bar is really where our endpoint manager technology sits. And if you've not looked at Ivanti Endpoint Manager, the simplest way to think of this, it's like taking SCCM, Intune, Jamf software, and smashing it all together in a single, very powerful console that can manage hundreds of thousands of machines at the same time. And it gives you the ability to manage your devices, deploy and manage your operating systems, and deploy and manage your applications. It's an incredibly powerful tool that's been around from the former LANDesk days, and has still got 6,000 customers globally that are managing hundreds of thousands of endpoints. And what we've started to do, in fact, is bring and integrate some of these technologies together. So as of the latest release of Endpoint Manager that came out, 2018.1 came out earlier this year, you've now got things like the former AppSense Environment Manager console built into this product, so that from a single console, you can discover all of your devices on your network, you can deploy Windows 10 and do Windows 10 as a service, you can push out all your apps or do an application catalog, and you can then deploy your GPOs, replace your logon scripts, and get your data and your files down. And those people that are looking at Windows 10 migrations, these two products literally go hand in hand quite nicely. So thought that was worth just calling out there. So where we are right now, we've got these User Workspace Manager products, and ultimately they are made up of Application Control, Environment Manager, Performance Manager, File Director, and Insight. Insight, by the way, is really a way of either pre-deployment or post-deployment of understanding of what's going on in your environment. It's an extremely lightweight agent. You deploy it onto the Citrix server, onto the VDI desktop, or onto my PC as I've got it installed. It gathers information about your applications, your privileges, your admin rights, your logon times, why your logon times are slow, your profiles, why they're bloated, why they're big. It monitors CPU, it monitors memory, it monitors where the user's files are, and it uploads that data into a virtual appliance via HTTPS, sticks it into an Elasticsearch database, and gives you the ability to produce some very simple, easy to read reports. Integra, you can use it all the time. You can even download it as an eval, and so you can very, very easily just see, hey, look, show me what's going on in terms of my logon times. Why are my logon times 45 seconds? It will break it down into, is it GPO? What GPOs is it? Is it a logon script? Is it pre the shell launching? Is it afterwards? We use it a lot pre-upgrades of Environment Manager, so we can optimize the configs. Some RES customers are using it so they can identify what's going on in their environment and how they might be able to optimize that as they move across to Ivanti Workspace Manager. So if you've not looked at Insight, good tool, basic in its functionality, but it does exactly what it says on the tin. It helps you understand what's going on in it, all of these four areas, before you then go and deploy a tool to actually take some action. And I'm going to come back to File Director in a bit anyway. So ultimately, the portfolio as it stands now in that User Workspace Manager is made up of those. And good question about the VDE. If you want a price on that again, so just feel free to ping us and we can get your price on that. What does the future look like, though? The future is extremely interesting, and it's extremely interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, we've seen a massive adoption of Office 365. Sounds like some people on this call already understand some of the challenges with deploying things like Outlook in a non-persistent environment and all the challenges that go around. How do you have a cached mode of Outlook in a non-persistent environment? Well, we now have a solution for that. We're actually on a bit of a journey with that one. We've brought out native functionality for that, which has gone down very well within our existing install base. We're now actively working on some concurrent control and also how we can support other things like OneDrive caches and some other things that want to sit in the VHD. So a whole host of work going on in this area. Some of that, again, you've seen releases earlier this year of Workspace Manager that have brought in that VHD OST support. Look out for another release in about 6 weeks' time that would extend that further. Look out for another release of that by the end of the year that would then extend that even further again. So we continue to help organizations do that. I mean, they're already using us for desktop composition, they're using us for security, they're managing their profiles with us. And what people really want is they don't want to have to go to another solution just to manage the OST file. So that's really an area of focus for us. We've also done some work around UWP applications. We're helping organizations control those as people move to Windows 10. They don't want people messing around with Windows Store applications. So we've got some work that we're doing around, have done and continue to do around that. Windows 10, and I think Windows 10 is now settled down, but we continue to try and simplify how we roll out Windows 10. So tile management, pinned item management, all continues to be areas that we continue to invest in. Again, some features have come out in the latest release, Use Workspace Manager 2018.1. There's some more planned for 2018.2. And the other area is around cloud. And this is definitely a big area from a development point of view, but it's also a big area for us in terms of what we're seeing in the market. We are seeing customers now place some of their VDI Citrix workloads into Azure and AWS. Nobody is going full cloud. Everybody is going hybrid. And in the same way that you've got multiple data centers, you've now got data centers that sit in Azure and some data centers that are sitting on-prem. And in that hybrid world where users are either failing over to cloud-delivered versions of Citrix, or they're from a load balancing point of view, they're jumping from one data center to another, it's incredibly important that you are able to manage the users across those two different environments. Everything we do when it comes to managing users, whether it's deploying out our configs or doing profile management, it's all using HTTPS communication. It's all using back-end SQL databases to store that information. It means that we've got the ability to serve a far more mobile workforce. It means that we don't have to rely on SMB shares on-prem and cloud connectors when we move to the cloud and worry about how we're going to keep those in sync. It means that we've introduced things like geo-sync functionality that allows us to be very specific about when we roam certain settings from one data center to another, and it allows us to manage once across all of that environment. So in many cases, we're helping people not just move to the latest version of Citrix, but also move to things like Citrix Cloud and putting their Citrix workloads in the cloud. So we're accelerating and enabling the deployment of cloud delivered desktops as well. So cache roaming, I mentioned. If you've not seen the latest version of User Workspace Manager inside Environment Manager, we now natively have got the ability to, as a user logs on, do you have a VHD? No, you don't. Fine, go and create me one. How big do you want it? Do you want it to be expandable? If yes or no, and then ultimately allow the Outlook OST cache to sit on that VHD. There's various points that can be triggered. We don't have to do that log on. It means that we can be very clever. When a user disconnects from a session, we can disconnect that VHD, meaning if they reconnect to another session, we can then reconnect it as well. That VHD management sits within the product, which means you can apply all the various different conditions and triggers to it that hopefully you've seen within that product before. And as I said, things like cookies and OneNote support are there today. OneDrive support is literally just around the corner, and things like concurrent access for those people that need it is coming later in the year. I mentioned things like that automation integration had been done, being able to get Ivanti User Workspace Manager to talk to the former RES automation products is built in. The other thing to note is it doesn't matter what type of Ivanti customer you are, whether you've got some of our patching solution, whether you've got a former AppSense product, whether you use us for service management, you are now entitled to the RES automation technology at a standard level free of charge. So any customer of ours right now, regardless of whether you're ex-Shavlik or ex-AppSense or ex-RES or ex-LANDesk, you are entitled to get a free standard version of automation, which means you can start to automate a lot of these tasks very, very, very easily without any additional cost. Pete, we did want to touch very quickly on File Director. I'm conscious of time, but File Director is really starting to gain some momentum, particularly in the last 6 to 18 months. We've seen some fairly significant deployments of File Director, 120, 140,000 seats in size. File Director is a virtual appliance, or appliances. You download File Director. You spin it up in ESX or Hyper-V, you stick it in your DMZ, and it suddenly provides HTTPS access from all of your devices back through to your existing SMB shares. That means I can get access to my home drive. That means I can get access to my S drive, my H drive. All of the drives that I used to require a VPN or a mapped drive to, or I tried using offline files to, I can now do through File Director. So it allows me to jump and gain access to my files that are currently sat in my own data center or your own data center. In addition to that, we've also got what's called a cloud connector that goes out for OneDrive for Business. So that allows me that if I save a file on my desktop, it automatically from my desktop gets synchronized back to the appliance, and then can either get placed on an SMB share or pushed out to OneDrive. So I can utilize my OneDrive for Business storage, but the synchronization is taking place through File Director, which means I've got complete visibility. I can audit and report on what's going on. I can apply policies to it. And I can also do what's called ghost file access. So, I might want to synchronize everything in my documents with my home drive, but I might want to have access and view only to terabytes of data on my S drive, but not synchronize it. So there's a number of very neat features within that technology that allow us to be very configurable at how we do the synchronization between the storage and the devices. This is being used in a number of scenarios. Windows 7 to Windows 10 migrations, suck all the data up from my Windows 7 machine, back it up, roll out Windows 10, get those files back onto that device and synchronize them. It's also very useful if you want to try and deliver OneDrive access in a terminal server or a VDI non-persistent environment, because we've got that ghost file access. It's very, very good when I jump from a physical desktop to a virtual desktop, because I can save a file on my desktop in VDI and it suddenly appears on my Mac or on my desktop machine. And it also gives me access to all of my files across multiple devices, regardless of where I am. So if you've not taken a look at File Director, that might be something else to take a look at, regardless whether you're RES or AppSense. I think the question you were probably going to ask, Pete, was what do people do from a licensing point of view? If you're changing that platform, if you want to go from Res Workspace because you're doing a Windows migration or a Citrix migration, and you're interested in the Ivanti User Workspace Manager products, there is ultimately a free migration. We don't charge for that migration. So I think we charge a cent for the SKU. That's just so that we can actually send out the licenses. So yeah, if you're an existing Res customer and you're using Workspace and you want to move or migrate, there is no cost from a licensing point of view to get you from Res Workspace so you can start to use those environment manager application control products and get a very, very like for like feature set across those two. And that doesn't matter whether you're a named user or concurrent user.
So the other kind of add-on question someone had was, they have a couple net new workspace installs. Should they kind of ditch that and use User Workspace Manager instead if they're net new?
If they're net new and you've not deployed and you've not got through the planning process, you've not gone through the design process, then I would definitely say, look, take a look at the product. I mean, ultimately, both products are achieving the same thing, right? You want ultra fast logons. You don't want to mess around with group policies. You don't want to rely on group policies and scripting. And you want to get rid of all your roaming profile problems. And whether you want to do whitelisting, URL redirection, manage the CPU, both things are ultimately going to give you a very, very similar outcome. They are just architected and controlled in a slightly different way. Res is typically using SMB shares to store profiles. The former AppSense Ivanti Workspace Manager technology is using, by default, is using an IIS SQL infrastructure, but there's no reason why you can't use SMB shares as well. So if you've not gone through the design phase, my recommendation would be, take a look at Workspace Manager, definitely. If you've gone through, 6 months worth of design and it's all been signed off, but you've not yet rolled it out, then no, stay with the Res thing, because that Res thing is, as I said, it's going to be supported and maintained for the foreseeable future.
Cool. And another kind of good migration question. Is there a migration, or will there be a migration tool to migrate Res Workspace settings to DesktopNow? And I know there's some third-party tools out there, and I forget the name of it. So if you're on the call, I apologize.
Simple answer to that is no. We're never going to have a net click next and pick everything up what you had configured in Res and move it to User Workspace Manager. I think we could do it technically. To your point, I think there's a couple of third-party tools out there that try and do a good job of that. We could do that, but you know what? We'd then spend the next 6 to 12 months trying to do that, and what we then do is we start to lose focus on where we really want to go. And the cloud, VHD, Citrix Cloud, Azure AD, SQL Azure AD, SQL Azure support, Intune, autopilot support, all of these things that we're currently working on would ultimately go on hold, and that I don't think does us or our customers any favors. So there are some, as I said before, you can pick up the profile. If your existing Res profiles, users profiles in Res are sat on an SMB share, we can pick them up and get them into User Workspace Manager fairly quick. We could do that with UEV profiles. We can do it with UPM profiles. We can do it with local and roaming profiles. That's pretty easy to do. If it's about getting some of the configuration from within inside Res into Ivanti, there are a few tools that can help. From a security point of view, actually, that's very easy. And, one of the things that Ed is going to demonstrate for us, I think, in a second is, how the application control works within a Workspace Manager. And that is very different to how the whitelisting was configured in Res. And hopefully what you'll see and get a feeling for is that actually I don't need to worry about that migration, because things just work in the new world.
Cool. And yeah, the tool that I know is out there, it's called Virtual Engine Toolkit, is done by a partner in the UK. Great tool. If you guys are interested, check it out. What I don't know is if it goes res to AppSense. I know it goes AppSense to res, so I'll have to do some research.
Cool. All right, one more thing from me. I mentioned that all of our customers are entitled to a free version of our automation engine, the former Res automation. They are also entitled, all of our customers, to a tool called Extraction. Extraction is a dashboard tool. It is not a reporting tool. It doesn't compete with a Lakeside, an EG Innovations, or a Controller. It is looking at databases that have already collected data and bringing that information into single dashboards. So I can have a CCM dashboard alongside my User Workspace Manager database. So as an example, you know, we put all of our profiles into a database. You might want to see how big that database is, what application sizes are, who's got the biggest profile, is a profile growing in size. All of that can be presented in these beautiful dashboards, but there are connectors within that product for a whole ton of solutions, right? There are SolarWinds connectors, ServiceNow connectors, all sorts of connectors within Extraction. But if you've not checked out Extraction, again, you can download that Ivanti.com from the community site.
All right, cool. So so I've been going back and forth. The great thing about technology is we can text on the side. So I was texting with Ed, and because we have about 8 minutes left and we want to respect everybody's time, what he's gonna do is create a YouTube video of the demo we're gonna do today, and then parallel, what I'm gonna do is our next Ivanti webinar will be focused on security and the security stack from Ivanti, which I think will be a great webinar to bring to you guys. So if you're interested, definitely let us know, and we'll try to get that out late summer and do a nice little webinar that's more security focused. Ed was going to show some of the cool functionalities within App Control Manager, which is very security focused. And Simon, I think you would agree that, you know, user environment management, user workspace management is more and more becoming a security play, because let's face it, to provide a good experience for your users, but also secure it, is a good thing. So we'll work to get a nice little YouTube video out, and we'll do a webinar strictly focused on Ivanti and the security stack. All right, so really quick, you know, who is Integra? So really, who is Integra? I'll just cover really quick. I'm not going to take too much time on this. We are a partner of Ivanti. We also are partners with Citrix, IGIL, and some of the other complementary partners in the stack to Ivanti. We have a great relationship with Ivanti. So if you have any needs around services or renewals or anything, we can definitely help you, especially things around, you know, Windows 10, you know, migration scenarios with User Workspace Manager. You know, whether you're considering, you know, what do I do with my res deployment? You know, I definitely can help there because I spent time at res, and then we do have a practice around, you know, helping you guys kind of strategize on the future of, you know, how to you know, migrate to the new and improved User Workspace Manager. So definitely keep us in mind if you have any projects. This is just a little portfolio slide of all our partners, and you know, again, we can provide services ranging from, you know, basic consulting, and typically what we do is we work with Ivanti very tightly, and you know, we sell their paper, and we would then be subbed out to come on site and, you know, do the consulting for Ivanti. So we can do that in either a fixed project sense or what we call a time and materials / block of hours. We do offer managed services as well. And then finally at the bottom, you'll notice these things called micro assessments. We do offer an Ivanti micro assessment where we focus on AppSense and RES, especially RES. So if you're interested in kind of understanding, you know, hey, what do I do with my RES deployment? I'm at point A and I want to figure out how do I get to point Z. You know, we can try to help you there. You know, I'd probably be the guy that's going to be doing them, and we can give you some ideas on what to consider and how long you should potentially hold on to RES. And again, it's all going to play out based on your upgrade strategy, your migration strategy, and feature set strategy. So again, we can help there. And again, that's a free, what we call micro assessment. So what I'm going to do is open it up to question and answer right now. We do have a couple questions. So if you have any questions, definitely raise your hand. We can unmute you. But if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A dialogue. And I do have some unanswered questions, Simon, for you and possibly Ed. And so the first question that didn't get really answered, I just want to make sure it's clear for is Insight a separate license for RES Workspace customers? Like, so I'm thinking, I know the answer is no, it's not it's a feature, but do they have to download like a separate license file to get it to work?
Yes, they do.
But they do get access to it, correct?
So a RES customer,
Yep.
a RES customer would no, that would be an additional cost.
Okay.
Yeah. So there is a separate license, and there is an additional cost, albeit a rather small one. However, 30-day evals are available, so that might be a good place to start.
Cool. Yeah, and it's one of my favorite products. When I was at RES, I mean, I can say it now. I actually liked the Insight product. I thought it was a great product and a great addition to the portfolio. So, all right. So kind of a sticky question, and it might be fun to answer, and we can kind of give our own takes on it. But so around file director, the question came up. Does this negate the need for some of the competing products out there, like an FS Logix or like a Liquidware or even Citrix Applearing?
So file director, no. So environment manager, yes. So environment managers OSD, VHD support that I spoke about.
Yep.
That is in the environment manager technology, and in most cases would compete or negate the need for any of those competitive products that you mentioned. There are, if I mean, let's just talk openly, right? FS Logix have got support for concurrent access. They have got their cloud connector. Even if you look at Citrix now with the latest version of UPM, they can do the VHD support. They can do the mail search support. We are on the road to tick in all of those boxes. Today, we can allow you to store the OSD file on the VHD. We support putting favorites in there. We support putting some other parts in there. We don't do OneDrive support today. That's coming in the next 4 weeks. We don't do concurrent access. We don't do the Windows indexing piece. Again, those things are on our roadmap and should be completed by the end of the year. So depending on what your requirement is, yes, it can negate the need. However, if you have got a specific requirement for one of those enhanced pieces of functionality today, then there's no reason why you can't use those products in conjunction. And we do have some customers that do that, but be aware that the functionality is coming, and it's coming pretty damn quick.
All right, cool. All right, so then 2 more questions. One I can answer too. So the question around file director. So can we use native drive mapping as we used before to share file share drive mapping? Okay.
100%. We have something called drive mapping emulation, which means that when I go into my computer, I've got an H drive and an S drive. It looks and feels like it's a drive mapping, but it's not. It's file director is providing that familiar view to me, and it's doing the synchronization or the view in the background.
Cool. All right, and then the last question is around training. There's a person asking about, will customers get hands-on training about Ivanti Workspace User Workspace Manager before they plan to migrate? And I think obviously you guys probably have some training, but one of the things we do as a value-added partner is offer hands-on workshops. And we did used to run an AppSense hands-on workshop, a 1-day hands-on workshop. And we are going to look to spin that back up to help customers get their head around the User Workspace Manager. And then in conjunction, we'll work with Ivanti to make sure we hit all the content that is needed. So, watch for that potentially, late Q3 into Q4. It's something that I'm looking at spinning up as the CTO / CMO of the company. So keep an eye out for those, and we're going to work with Ivanti very tightly on making sure everybody is successful no matter what path you're heading down. So cool. All right, with that, we are 1 past the hour. I want to thank everybody for taking time out of their schedules today to sit with us for an hour. Again, hopefully this was valuable, and I also want to thank Simon and Ed for taking time out of their days to present. And again, we will post this recording, so if you have other folks that couldn't make it, we will post this recording and make it available to those who could not attend. So thank you, and have a great day, and thank you, Simon and Ed, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Pete. Great working with you.
Thank you.
Likewise.